everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning to talk about Yaquina Hall, our project that we label as innovative, affordable housing through adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is the process of transforming an existing building or site into a new function that meets the changing needs and demands of the community. It's a sustainable and creative way of preserving the historical and cultural value of a place while also addressing the social and economic challenges of the present. Adaptive reuse for affordable housing is not without its challenges, however, and we will talk about that in this session and explore the successful transformation of Yaquina Hall. It's a historic renovation for us and preservation of the former Oregon State Hospital nursing building in Salem. It's been adapted from the former nurses' quarter into 52 units of supported housing designed to address the needs of Salem's most vulnerable, including those with serious and persistent mental illness. On-site supportive services address the unique needs of the community members experiencing homelessness and those with disabilities and developing permanent housing goals. I'd like to introduce our team to you. Myself, Jessica Blakely, I'm the Director of Development and Strategy for Salem Housing Authority, and we have with us...
Hi, I'm Nicole Yates. I'm the Housing Administrator for Salem Housing Authority.
Brandy Pine, I'm Project Manager at Walsh Construction.
Good morning, I'm Richard Rothweiler with AC & Company Architecture. I was the project architect for the renovation for Yaquina Hall.
Thank you, esteemed members of the panel. Because we have such a small group in here today, I invite you to interrupt and ask questions as we go along in the process, or you can always hold questions till the end, just in case you think you might hear some of the answers through the presentation. First, before I get started, I would love for Nicole Yates to share how this project ended up being a Salem Housing Authority project over 8 years ago.
Thank you. So I want to say that my former predecessor, Andy Welch, who unfortunately passed away this year, just a month shy of the completion of this project, is the inspiration behind Yaquina Hall. On one summer morning in June of 2015, as I'm finishing a whirlwind hurdle of renovations at Parkway East, Parkway West, and Robert Lindsay Tower, and a year-long straight relocation, he says, I want you to come and see a project. And we stood outside the back door steps of Yaquina Hall, and he looks down at me, because Andy's very tall, and he says, this is our next project. And I said, you have got to be kidding me. But here we are. It's beautiful, and I'm glad that inspiration has been seen through. So that's how this all began one day.
Yes, a very interesting story indeed, and we were actually able to dedicate our community room in memory of Andy, our other fearless leader on this project. So let me talk a little bit about the timeline. You see in this picture here, you see the U-shaped building, which is Yaquina Hall. Yaquina Hall was just a tiny little piece of this master subdivision, which we called the North Campus. And that is located across from the Oregon State Hospital. There were 13 buildings on the whole site, and the only one that was suitable for restoration was Yaquina Hall. The rest were all demolished. The second picture you'll see right there is the tunnel system, which connects all of those magic buildings within the Oregon State Hospital campus, and is one of the most unique features of the project that was well talked about through the whole renovation. So timeline. This project started in concept with Andy Welch, June of 2015, and we got our temporary certificate of occupancy in April of 2023, our 8-year-long project. So what does 8 years do in pre-development? Cost, cost, cost. There was constant refreshing of bids, our cost escalation. I don't know if anybody knew, but there was a global pandemic that happened in the middle of all that during pre-development. Thankfully, we had another project that was going on that was in construction during the pandemic, so we were able to see some of those trends that were coming our way as they were happening. definitely had its challenges for sure. We were fortunate to have a wonderful team that stuck with us through the entire 8 years, from which you will hear from today, and their experiences with this historic preservation. They'll speak to the historic elements. One of the big factors too in the cost was we had assumed, because it was prior housing, that we would not be prevailed in our wages. Because it was a state surplus property and they used it for office space, it triggered commercial bully wages, not just for this piece of the building, but also for South Fair Apartments, which is your run-of-the-mill apartment building, garden style, walk up. We could not, we attempted to fight that and get a split decision. We were told no, 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 no. Because of the commercial use of this building, it triggered that bully wages, which increased the project cost by over 20%. There was a continued need for gap resources. Every review of costs identified some additional gap, and the prevailing wage conversations came about 6 months prior to closing was when we got our wage determination, and that was a $1.5 million gap right there. And we had to go for a legislative ask to fill that gap, but we got it done. Our project cost went from a projected $9.7 million to $13.7 million when we started construction. Historic buildings have their own unique unknowns. So through the construction process and all these identified unknowns, we came to a total project cost of $15.3 million. So, close to hitting that doubling mark from where we initially started. Many costs associated with those delays, bid updates. We had 2 code changes happen in that 8-year period as well. And the project being a part of that master subdivision, every action of anyone else on the subdivision triggered some action on our point as well. Having project-based vouchers, we were also subject to holding hostage our little baby partition because of choice limiting actions that could prevent us to get to closing. So excited to talk about these challenges in more detail. I was wondering, Richard, would you like to take a deeper dive into the interior designs of this building and any exciting nuances you encountered?
Certainly, thank you. So to do an interior renovation on a historic structure has a lot of different things that comes up that you just have to work your way through. So we've got a couple of slide images up here of the on the left, the main entry area to the building on the first floor level, and there's just a lot of different pieces in there. The structural system was designed it was an old structural system. I had actually never seen it before, the way it was built, and it imposed limitations on us that we had to then deal with, and how much we could change things. The good thing about it was that it originally was apartments for the nursing staff for the hospital, so there was plumbing there originally and chases and locations that we could reuse, but they were all too small, maybe not in the right place. We had to reorganize everything, and that was challenging through the structural system. The historic renovation portion was very hard to navigate and very difficult sometimes. They imposed on us that we had to maintain the hallways pretty much as is. But then we had to work with everybody, because if we laid out the apartments, the doors into the old apartment locations didn't work to the new apartment locations. So we had to change everything up, because the original apartments were very tiny for the nursing quarters. And so we needed to make actual, apartments out of these and move the doors around. So we had to navigate all of that. We had to navigate all of the existing finishes they wanted to keep, the plaster work. So we had to do a lot of fixing and changing to the plaster. And Brandy will talk about that a little bit more later. Windows, historic to the exterior, were always fun. I think we have another slide of the exterior. Yes?
It's taking my presentation away, yes. Let's talk about the exterior elements, Richard.
Right, so you can see here kind of before and after. It was really falling apart in some places on the exterior of the building. The masonry was cracked and spalled off. Mortar joints were falling apart. The covered porches were all just rotting away and just completely falling apart. So we had to go in and repair all this and bring it back up to code. But we had to match everything. So that meant any new brick had to match the existing brick. And depending on where you were at on the building, the color changed. So there wasn't one consistent color throughout, especially in the mortar. We have to get the mortar color the same for the historic renovation. Well, we went through, I don't know, 12 or 15 mortar samples before we got to the right one. And even that was a close match. It wasn't an exact match, because everywhere you went on the building, it was a different color. And over time, the state had repaired things and they used completely different colors. They didn't try to match or do anything. So that was fun to navigate. So we had a lot of challenges in putting all of this together, but every step of the way, we found some new historic element or some new existing element that we had to work with in order to make it happen, as well as get the apartments in, get the new finishes in, respect the old finishes, and then make it all work. And I think we got there. It took us a little bit, but we got there. It was very fun, very exciting. So.
Thank you, Richard. Does anyone else want to speak to any of those elements not covered yet?
I just want to speak to the windows because he's not even telling you the whole story behind the window process. The Historic Society wanted us to keep the pre-existing windows that you see in this far picture, which, as you can tell, have every different size of air conditioning units that could have been used from 1947 to the 80s. And so navigating through all of the damage that was created by putting these AC units, as well as windows being single pane and lead-based paint on them, steel frame was going to cost us, probably taking some of your thunder here, but $1.5 million to have them repaired. And probably a year to a year and a half process of negotiation and having them understand that this is a tenant-based affordable housing, and it's absolutely necessary for us to change these windows for efficiency reasons. We came to terms. The windows that you see on the other side are a historic replica of the pre-existing windows. I can't tell you, I was on pins and needles till every single one of those arrived from New York on 3 different semi trucks. And the day they told me that 3 were missing off the final truck was a night that I just didn't sleep very well. So it's not real easy to get these windows, and they were the biggest challenge of making sure this building was constructed. And we started and we went through a whole summer into another fall, and we still had no windows in this building, and we had apartments being made. So it literally took them, what, 9 months? 38 weeks. 38 weeks to get them to our site, so.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, to sort of piggyback on all of that, as we were just saying, over 60% of the windows in the existing building were modified. And one of the first things that we did as Walsh when we partnered on the project with everyone is we started diving into how do we get SHPO to agree to let us replace these windows. And we went through a number of different alternate products and window systems that we were trying to present as feasible options. We went through and we put together a lengthy report that basically said, though, that the windows, although modified, were actually in decent shape. But there was a number of extenuating circumstances, like non-thermally broken, single pane. We are now taking a window that was in a space that didn't have a kitchen and a bathroom, that which produce moisture in the air with ventilation. So now you're trying to draw that air in. So these windows were going to leak and they were going to condensate, and that was going to cause them to degrade faster. So even though we could repair them, it was at an it was it was almost 50% more to repair them. They were going to perform poorly. Tenants were going to think they're leaking because they're condensating. And so we were successful in finding an alternate window product that was at a lower price point. But when we went to construction in a pandemic, we were warned that they were a long lead time. And so we did have to adjust our schedule and go into construction with sort of an out of sequence, knowing these were going to be delayed. But then during construction, they ended up being even further delayed because of just ongoing supply issues and glazing issues. And so, you know, we were prepared for out of sequence work. We were doing out of sequence work for longer than we were anticipating through the winter months, which is difficult when you're trying to put flooring in a unit with no windows. So there was a number of things that we had to do to accommodate, but in the end, it worked out really great. And they function better, they're a better performing window, and the tenants are much happier. Plus, I think it looks nice.
It was amazing.
No,
Okay, well, now it's time to talk about some of the construction-related items. Brandy, I wondered if you could talk about the major items like the plaster and any other pieces that stick out in your mind.
Yeah, so going, I guess, sort of tying into windows, one of the historic features that we were required to maintain was not just the corridors, which were covered in plaster, but the exterior walls on all floors were also plaster. And at the windows, I don't know if we've got a good picture. At the windows, there's a unique sort of radius jamb that was original to the building. And so those jambs were part of one of the main plaster features that we were trying to salvage and repair. When we started doing demo, the plaster on the first floor, when we were in design, you know, you can go through and you can see there's areas that are crumbling or need repaired. But once we pulled the windows and we started doing demo work and removing any partition walls, the plaster just started falling off the wall. I mean, you could touch it and a whole, you know, 8x10 panel would fall on the ground. So we were fortunate, and we had a great partner who, you know, plaster repair is a dying art, and we found a company that was local in Salem that had a couple that they were able to put all of it back together. We were looking at ways that we could use drywall and do a radius, you know, drywall trim, but the biggest we could get on that was like 1.5 inches, and our radius is like a 3-inch, and it's a much larger profile. So we ended up luckily having them as a partner in the project, and they ended up doing about 30% more plaster repair than they had anticipated originally. And they did that, and it looks wonderful, especially with the new windows and how we were able to trim those all out. Another feature that was, I would say, unique with doing a historic rehab is that the elevators that were in the existing building were small, and they couldn't accommodate a stretcher. And they really, for move-ins and things like that, it would have been difficult for you to get a couch or a bed in them. And so there were 2 elevators, and one of them we enlarged. And the location of the elevators, it's a U-shaped building, and the elevators are at the inside corners. And so when we enlarged the one shaft, the elevator overrun had to go up. Technically, elevators have to go up 4 feet over the top of the car at its highest spot, but we had a fixed point with the valley on the roof. So we were not able to modify the roof line to accommodate this larger elevator. And we spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how to get a variance through the state to have a lower elevator overrun so that it's only that one corner, and the way that it's situated and set up, you know, it's a small area that eats into that 4-foot requirement. But we were able to get the variance because otherwise we would have to modify the roof line, which part of SHPO is we couldn't change the roof, couldn't change the exterior, couldn't change the corridor, couldn't change the outside wall. So that was another feature that was unique, and we were able to navigate around successfully.
You did all of that work. The other pictures that we have here are of the basement flooring in the bottom corner there. And the other picture you'll see up top is the tunnel. And I wondered, Brandy, did you want to let us know what those pictures represent?
Yeah, so the top left photo is the elevator shaft, and it's looking up. So you can see the roof, the trusses there, and the rafters, how they come down into that valley. The middle picture on the top, that's just sort of showing the radius, and that's a before, I believe. So that's the radius on that jam. The picture on the far right, that's where we actually closed off the tunnel. So we removed the tunnel completely. We put in a new wall, and that black coating is the waterproofing that's now on our new basement wall. The tunnel itself, we took the roof off, we cored holes in the bottom of it, and we backfilled it, so any water that gets in there will drain out. Tunnels to nowhere. Actually, when we got started, they had already done the work. So the property is, as I don't remember if Jessica or Nicole talked about the fact that the entire property had to get developed. And so all of the new infrastructure and roadways had to go in before we got started. And in that work, they actually closed off the tunnel at the property line, but not at the building. So we were just responsible for that portion. The bottom left, that shows all the new trenching we had to do to put in drains to accommodate all of the apartment restrooms. And then the other two bottom windows or bottom pictures are the windows sort of as completed. So it shows how that plasterwork got completed and then how we trimmed it out. And we left like the radiators and things like that, even though there's no parts in them, but they're still there as part of that historic exterior wall look.
Thank you, Brandy. Yes, the tunnel was quite exciting. Definitely during that 8-year period, we spent a lot of time just peeking in on it to see, like, has anything changed in here? It was definitely filled in before I came in, and it was just, but you couldn't see all the way to the back. So even walking down there was a bit creepy. And yeah, and before I came along, there was some maintenance people that told me that their first interactions with the building, they could actually follow the tunnels and go up, and it's like whack-a-mole. They could find little places up in the little tunnel system after those other buildings were demolished before the other subdivision partners got started on their projects as well. So definitely a fun experience for the maintenance team. And I enjoyed my fair share of tours to that. I was always the one going, does anyone want to see the tunnel? So it's very exciting stuff. So does anyone else want to speak to any construction related items, or do we think we've covered the big stuff? Yes? All right. I'm sure people will have questions. I wanted to talk a little bit about the service delivery in the building. Our fearless leader here, Nicole Utes, was able to connect with our service providers and during the construction process, bring them into the design piece to ensure that it met their needs. I wondered, Nicole, if you could talk a little bit about how the building was adapted and what rooms were created for our service-related partners and any other considerations I have not mentioned from an operational standpoint.
Sure. So I will say that in 2015, when we first concepted this innovation project, we had never done a housing first, never knew PSH, didn't have anything more than affordable housing. And from 2015 to 2023, times have changed drastically in Salem. The needs changed drastically in Salem. And this building really morphed into just affordable housing with supportive services on site to more of a PSH level supportive housing. And in an attempt to meet the needs in attracting in supportive service providers, I offered that they could come in during construction, tour the location, let us know what their needs were to ensure they could provide good supportive services on site to our residents, and we would pay through the project to meet those needs and adapt the building to what they needed. So they requested these various locations. I don't know if you can see the main office. You can't really see a picture of it, but it does have a roll-up window Does have 2 office stations and a property management office. That was their request. We did all built-ins. So all the desk and every feature was built into the building. Then as you go downstairs where a lot of the services would actually be provided, we built in the one location which is considered, it's not photoed on here, is it? But there's one that's a quiet room. They asked for a calming space, so if somebody was in a crisis that they could bring them into that room. And it had different dimming lighting and different abilities, like they wanted softer furniture, different features of that. We made sure that was created. This is a supportive service provided office. We actually have quite a few MOUs on this property for others such as Bridgeway services and recovery services that come into the building. These are drop-in locations for them. Our community room was designed by Lisa and our design team at AC & Co. And we just ensured that they were a part of picking the pieces in the final, making sure that they could have a real community space. I can tell you within the first 30 days, they've already organized Taco Tuesdays, pizza nights, all sorts of stuff, and it's a heavily used room. The features of the building have really helped us provide from going from an affordable with some services on site to really we have a lot of high acuity needs, and we're able to support every resident at this building, even though that may not have been what we thought in 2015. Now 2023, we really adapted to the times and knowing the clientele that would likely come into the building. When we opened up the waiting list, we had every nonprofit, housing, advocacy, every group. We opened it at 12:01 a.m. on a Saturday night. And within 25 minutes, I think we had over 100 applications, all with a homeless preference. So we were actually able to provide the services, and between our property management, trauma-informed maintenance, and our teams, we had a lot of hurdles. It's the building that keeps on giving to me. But we actually got our temporary occupancy certificate of occupancy, and then 3 weeks later, Comcast cut every single line to our building and our power went down and we were shut down for 4 weeks. So we had a very short timeline to lease this building once our power got brought back online about a month later. And May 30th, we opened the doors for the first residents, and by the end of June, I think we had all but 4 of them filled. So within a 30-day timeline with all the wraparound services and the team, mostly SHA team, we were still trying to get our supportive services providers there and get it all up and running. But it has to retain full, and we're continuing to manage it as intended.
Great, and thank you, Nicole, for that insight. Wanted to mention on why things are so bare in this picture. These are pictures were taken before our lease-up period, and once May 30th happened, I don't remember anything else. So we were very, very busy moving people into the building, supporting them being housed now. Some of them came from the continuum of care pieces that Salem now has, which we're very grateful for, which is the Arches Inn and also the Navigation Center, which is now open. So we're starting to see referrals, and we're starting to see that continuum of care work. It was never intended necessarily for this building, but it's morphed over time. One of the cool things we picked up while we were here in Portland is that we have this beautiful, and I wish we had a picture, but I haven't even seen it yet. That's how crazy this project has been, and is going to go in the foyer of the building. It's a huge historic interpretive panel, and it really shows the timeline of the history of the building. In the Oregon State Hospital Mental Health Museum, there's a whole wall that talks about Building 33, Yaquina Hall. They called it the nurses' dorm, so we had a lot of issues locating information on Yaquina Hall because they didn't call it that. So once we were able to connect during our open house actually with some of the nurses that actually worked here. They were able to also help get us to a place where we could find more information and build that into our interpretive panel. So we'll be putting that up very soon. Also, Lisa Mance and AC & Co assisted us in finding some art designs that we could print onto canvas and put in the hallways too. And a lot of them are representative of the Willamette Valley and some landscapes that you would see if you were to drive through the Willamette Valley as a calming aspect into the building. What Nicole did not mention was that I got to do this really cool thing and surprise her with her favorite element of the building, which is the trim lights. If you haven't looked them up, you should. They're like permanent holiday lights around the building, and you can control them with an app on your phone. Rumor says colors control mood, right? So we've been using some of the color changes to impact the moods of the building, and the residents really like the aspect of it too. So definitely added a little pizzazz to the historic piece. Was there anything else anyone wanted to speak to with regards to this project before we move on to Q&A?
Just one more thing about service delivery. We didn't apply for any of these programs with service dollars. And part of the reason we did all of the adaptive transformation for service location was to entice our service providers into this building and have their offices set up and ready to go, because we don't have operational funding in this building to support the services that are there on site. So it's really a team effort of what we can give and what they can give and what we can give back and forth. So we supply all the internet access, all the utilities, the office spaces, pretty much everything they use on site, and they provide us the services there as a memorandum of understanding and agreement. So hopefully we can continue it forward.
Before I open it up to the room, I have to ask Nicole one final question. Nicole, what is your most asked question about Yaquina Hall?
Is it haunted? I must have been asked that at least 500 times over the course of 8 years. Yaquina Hall is not haunted. I have spent a lot of my life in Yaquina Hall at various hours, days, nights of the weeks. I've been through the entire tunnel system, and no, I don't feel like Yaquina Hall is haunted. I think it served a wonderful meaning purpose of teaching nurses, and I really wanted to keep that aspect of the lamplight, what is that? The Florence Nightingale lamp, which is the symbol of graduating from nurses school. You will see that throughout Yaquina Hall. And I want people to know what it served in the past and what it is today. And it was very touching to see the nurses who once trained there get to see it in a whole new light. They had very much, some of them have a lot of trauma from their days of working at the state hospital. And to see it go to an adaptive, good reuse and be put back into for a very meaningful purpose was probably one of the most touching things to see.
Thank you, Nicole. Fun project. Do we have any questions from the audience? Please, let me come to you.
Thank you so much. What fun. I may have missed this. I'm not sure. I came in just maybe 3 minutes late, but I was wondering a little bit more on the numbers. You mentioned what the total project construction cost at least was, and it sounds like there was no land cost, but number of units and maybe just a little bit more on that development side to consider when we're thinking about where it plays in to the overall landscape of new construction and adaptive reuse.
Yes, so that's a great question. I'd love to speak about kind of how we got there. We originally had a purchase and sale agreement for the building, and it was about $400,000 or $500,000. That happened right at the onset. And then we had some other nuances that were worked into there. The hard and difficult part of this being a part of a master plan subdivision is that every action that happened on the entire campus impacted our project. And so one of the things in 2017, when we thought we were going to get to closing at that point, we recognized that the Department of Administrative Services had not contacted the tribes and done that part of the environmental review. Everything went to a complete standstill. Pencils went down. We had to go to OHCS and say, we don't know what to do. We can't continue our project because of this, holding up our end. And so through that process and that very lengthy time, I would say between 2017 and 2019, where we were completely pencils down until they performed ground penetrating radar to locate a potential cemetery that they believed might be on the grounds themselves. So in the end, we were able to negotiate that PSA to $0. We were able to get our earnest money back, and DAS also provided $1.5 million to the project for the delays. So legislatively and through some political encouragement, we were able to get some funding back to the project. But had that not have happened, we would have had to budget in that land acquisition cost of about $500,000. And then also just kind of being a part of that overall subdivision and the delays, they credited us back that 1.5 million. So if the delays don't happen, not a big deal, but they were trying to offload that surplus property like that. They would have probably negotiated, a lot of things, but there are price tags that come with surplus property that we learned. Definitely, great question. Anything to add on that? Oh, sorry, 52.
I think that there's a key piece to this that not everybody realizes, but we had a private market developer that saved the day for this property. They were the other purchaser of the subdivision and built Jory Apartments, which also they set aside some affordable units, which I greatly appreciate in our market. But he's the one who finalized the subdivision, got the roads in, made it happen. It was a lengthy process to get this parcel subdivided, and working through all the years. Really, there was an engineering firm, then there was a new engineering firm, and all these delays year after year cost tremendous amounts of money. Not only did that happen, but it tied up our capital, and it makes it very difficult for us to move on to the next project. There were many times I shook my head and went, do I kill this deal? But we had so much pre-development money tied up in it that I had to go ahead and see it through. And I knew that we needed this, and this building needed to be saved, or it was going to continue to rot and deteriorate and be an eyesore for the community.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, I think a part of the project cost that really elevated was having to refresh the phase one, having to get all of those things ready for that environmental clearance at the very end. So although we had our ducks in a row ready to close 2017, we had to start all over and do them all again. And then that just creates the refreshing of the cost. We actually had to get, we can thank, sorry, I'm forgetting his name, Brian Sturdivant from HUD. Who helped us so substantially get this through at the very end, because we were having so many challenges with all of the, like, what triggers this? What's choice limiting? She even went and put signs around our property like, don't touch, so don't touch our property. Caution tape, while they were doing the infrastructure, because that could trigger everything and kill it all at once. So HUD was one of our biggest advocates to get this through, and OHCS for that matter, to get this through to the finish line with all of these challenges. We were just very transparent about them while they were happening. So that was great. Any other questions? Yes.
You guys know I'm going to ask this. What was your capital stack?
Oh boy, I didn't bring that with me, but let's just go through them real quick. We had 4%, we had home, CDBG, we had historic tax credits, we had the DAS contribution, we had Salem Housing Authority's contributions. What am I forgetting, Nicole? I feel like there's 8 sources and uses, or 8 sources on this one. Oh gosh, you're right, Becky. OHA funding for, there's a mental health housing fund through OHCS, which was to service those 20 units for serious and persistent mental illness. Gosh, I should have brought that with me, but I didn't. No, we did not. Yes, significant contribution, $6.1 million for the mental health housing funding itself, and then stacked with the tax credits, both historic and 4%.
And I will give a shout out to Housing Development Center and Philip Doko. He stuck with me for 8 years. He kept telling me he was going to retire, and he didn't. And I kept telling him, one more, just stick with me. And thankfully, he rode this out, and he's still here working on it, getting it closed out today. So we couldn't have done this without Housing Development Center's help.
Yeah, extremely complicated walking through all of these nuances and challenges and delays. And I think at the time we had to make the decision of, are we going to kill this deal? We were in it already, $1 million of pre-development, just SHA.
Thanks. So with buildings of this age, a lot of time they are pre-modern zoning and they end up being non-conforming uses. Was a lot of those kinds of issues solved by being a part of a master plan development, or did you also have to deal with that kind of stuff?
Great question. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, you're right. A lot of these properties come with a lot of zoning issues, and navigating through the planning departments can be quite challenging to make sure that, aside from all the funding and the uses and all those other pieces to develop a property for this use, you still have to accommodate the building code and the planning code, and it can be very dicey. But as Nicole mentioned, there was another partner in this that was developing all of the rest of the acreage and the Jory Hill Apartments that went in, and they spearheaded all of that. So as DAS was partitioning and working with them and partitioning the whole lot, we were able to get our lot of a substantial size enough that a lot of those planning components went away. But even at that, it was still fun to navigate because there was requirements, and then there was 2 different code changes and 1 or 2 different planning code changes that happened that changed the makeup of what we had to respond to. Also, parking, not parking, how many stalls, not stalls, all kinds of requirements. But because of that development, we were lucky in that they took care of all of that. They put in all the roads, they put in all the sidewalks, they put in everything that we needed to comply. But even that was a hurdle, because as we were going through 2 or 3 years of that, the planning department kept putting requirements on the Yaquina Hall project, which didn't belong on the Yaquina Hall project, it belonged on the development. But they tagged it to Yaquina Hall, and it took us 2 years to get them to clear it off of Yaquina Hall because they were doing the development. So there was always pieces that you have to work through in the building code and the planning code in order to make all of these things happen. And the setbacks, the landscaping, we have a ton of landscaping out there that normally you wouldn't have, but we've got 1 billion plants out there because that's what the planning department required. So that's what we do. So yeah, there's all kinds of hurdles you have to go through each step of the way to get all that in. But we were fortunate because of the other developer, so we could navigate that actually fairly easily once we cleared those things off of our docket and put it back onto his docket.
Any other questions? All right. Love this part. Getting my steps in.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience working with SHPO and the requirements for that MOU and how you navigated through that. I know SHPO has this tendency to, if you breathe on a building, you're adversely affecting it. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
You did most of the navigating with them. I was the naysayer.
That was a lot of years of working with SHPO. We had to get a historic preservation consultant that we paid. Jessica Engelman was the consultant on record for this one. She did a phenomenal job of navigating all of what you say. They came back many times, I can't do this, can't do this. I'm like, how am I supposed to put housing in this building if I can't touch anything? So she did a lot of negotiating back and forth. She did the regular walks with SHPO. They were there. I did like to challenge them occasionally because I have a historic part of the state next door to me. And when we brought them out 6 times to look at different colors of brick and mortar. I said, well, how did they paint theirs red if I have to match these bricks? So, things like that. They were all great. Once you get through the process, probably my biggest fear was the window system and the clientele we serve and how we were going to get past that process to ensure that they had functioning windows that they could open and close, that served the purpose of keeping their units warm and cool. And that was probably the most lengthy process back and forth of wondering how this could be rational to think that these windows are okay, especially if we can provide a distinct product that matches them almost completely. But in the end, they came back and said we could do it. The roof line, I was like, that's not the original roof. This was built in 1947, and that is not the original roof, but I couldn't touch the roof. And that was a little frustrating. Every step of the way, it was kind of a give and take negotiation. When they told me that we had to keep all the doors in the hallway, put your case forward. Tell them who your clients are, who you're serving, and why that would be a complication. I said, can you imagine somebody with high acuity needs or SPMI that is trying to navigate which door is theirs when there's multiple doors all over the place? And they finally said, okay, we can see that, but you have to have the master plaster. And the gentleman and his wife, they were literally artists who came in and fixed this building. But it was really a lot of storytelling, and then having that historic consultant on record to help navigate all the exact forms, all the exact timelines, and making sure that the communication is back and forth with them on a regular basis.
Yeah, she really did a great job in navigating all of that, because I kept counseling to Nicole that every time we have dealt with SHPO on windows or roofs or anything, the answer is always no. It's existing, you have to keep it, you have to leave it, you have to repair it. And it was a wonderful surprise when they agreed, after all of the storytelling and rational arguments, that, okay, you can replace them, they just need to match. Okay, we can do that. Then Brandy and Walsh, they find the right windows and off we go. Same thing with the roof, can't touch the roof. Well, we have to put exhaust fans and all these apartments have to exhaust everything out of them. And so we're touching the roof. Well, do it this way, or no, do it this way. And we negotiated back and forth and came up with solutions. So from a certain standpoint, if you advocate and work and rationally go through it, you can get some surprising answers. And it was really to the benefit of the entire project on the windows, the roof, the doors, the hallways, the plaster work, the repairs, the brick, the mortar. But yeah, having the consultant on board for all of that to navigate all the forms, working back and forth with SHPO, just kept the project rolling.
Thanks all. I saw another hand over here. Yuko, I'm coming right to you.
I was curious about the building systems. For HVAC, what did you guys do, and did you have any challenges with the historical preservation?
This will take a minute. Who wants it? Okay.
So the HVAC system is one of those things that had a code change during the lengthy pre-construction period. And so we ultimately ended up with a DOAS system that supplies basically air to all the common areas, and then we are just ventilating from the units themselves. So there's no direct supply in the unit. there's operable windows. And then, but all of the common and public areas are supplied off of that DOAS system.
What you're forgetting to mention is that all of that had to be run through our loft level, which we call the basement. All of the mechanics for that had to be ran through the basement ceilings because we couldn't change any dynamics of the corridors in the first and second floor. I don't know if you have a picture.
We couldn't put a drop ceiling in the hallway of the first and second floor to run all the HVAC. Yeah, we couldn't put a drop ceiling in the first and second floor. They didn't care so much, SHPO didn't care so much about the basement, but the first and second floor had to stay as it is. So the existing plasterwork and arches and ceiling and everything, which is really quite high, and we had plenty of room to drop it down and run all kinds of pipes and all kinds of everything through it, we weren't allowed to. So a lot of the major ductwork is in the basement and it feeds up. A lot of the major pipe runs and everything, we actually moved to the apartment side of the corridor and then ran them there through soffits and everything else we built inside the apartments to leave the first and second floor at pretty much as is, except for moving the doors around and then fixing all the plaster. But yeah, they wouldn't allow us to do anything with those ceilings.
Follow-up questions? Anyone?
Do we know the origin of the name Yaquina or what it means or anything like that?
I do not know. In fact, the interesting part of this too is when it was already, there was a plaque on the wall. I think it's one of the pictures. I'll find it in just a second. So we just called it that, but there's also another plaque called Building 33. And that seems to be what people represented that this building name actually was Building 33 or the nurses' dorm. And so it's weird that it's called Yaquina Hall because no one actually who was using the building ever referenced it in that way.
No, actually, we've done so much research in state archives when we got shut down, and the environmental reviews went back through. I've actually spent a lot of time at state archives, Oregon State Hospital and Museum. It would have been really nice to know early on that it was referenced as the nurses' dorm because we would have found a whole lot of more stuff on it. But it was a very interesting, I can tell you, if you get a historic building and you're really interested, we became so intrigued with the history of the building and its past. And I believe there was a chicken farm, and a lot of the food sources were on this side of the land through the past years. I was out with the historic preservation team and the tribes when the ground penetrating radar occurred. And that was an interesting historical moment to be able to witness going through and ensuring that there was nothing, we weren't disturbing any resting areas for others. And that was very important to us. But Yaquina Hall is actually one of the newer buildings, why it was salvaged. The two across the street from it have a whole lot more history. They didn't even have electrical. They were still lighting them with lamp lights in a lot of the buildings, and it was pretty amazing to see all of that. Hence why they could not come up with salvaging those buildings. It's unfortunate. They were pretty cool buildings as well. So I think this one just happened to be the newer one, and when we did the ground penetrating radar, they were confident that the earth had been disturbed more than once at that location, which helped me put a little mindset that we weren't going to be disturbing any former resting grounds that were unknown, of the unknowns that were at the Oregon State Hospital. There's a lot of history at the Oregon State Hospital, hence why my common question is it haunted? There's a lot of good history with some of this as well, and we really want to focus that Yaquina Hall was a training facility and that it's being for a good adaptive use today.
Yeah, and if you have ever been on ORC calls, I don't know if any of you have ever done an ORC closing call before in this room, but on those calls, as we were coming up to closing, it was very interesting to hear all the different variations of what people thought that stood for. So it's Yaquina, so I don't know exactly the correct pronunciation, but we go with Yaquina because Yaquina Bay is in, Oregon. So it makes the most sense. But there were a lot of very interesting phonetic versions of that throughout all of the years with that. So not quite sure on that. We would have loved to have got there, but it was challenging to find anything. That's fine. I'm getting my steps.
I just have a question about the long-term asset management planning for a historic building and maintenance and, rehabbing units as people move out. Is there like a difference or a challenge in doing that long-term budget planning for maintaining the historic property in comparison to the other affordable?
Yeah, I think we've definitely considered some things in our operational expenses. Utilities, weren't really sure how that was all going to go. It's run typically like any other. So when we put the elements inside the units, how we did the interiors and how we remodeled them was very similar to what any other unit would look like. I think I had one slide up here where you can see the unit in detail. So the energy efficiency is essentially the same, especially with the change out of the windows. That was a huge plug for that to ensure we kept the operational costs down. I think the biggest consideration for us is that how services and the clientele we serve changed over those years and the need for operational service funding to be added into the budget. So I think over time, we're gonna have to figure out that solution and find something a little bit more long-term. But as far as just the overall systems and like a general operating budget, we're underwriting it just like it was a normal building. We spent a lot of time considering some of those things, but when we were adding in those energy efficiencies, I think we came to realize that we'd be seeing some similar costs to units that were of similar size. I think the population we serve is harder on units at times, and so really employing with our property management a very crucial and frequent inspection schedule. So really our asset management focus is on being on the site and being in the units and being with the residents more frequently than we would be at maybe another building that doesn't need that level of supportive services. So those were, did I miss anything you think?
I mean, the longevity of the windows is probably the biggest concern that I have, being historically remade and not knowing, what the length of it is and the difficulty in getting them. I was probably very mindful watching every window, every glass pane go in and making sure nothing broke during this time. And then, of course, when we were under construction, once they went in, the security aspects of making sure that they weren't damaged during that. But long-term, we don't know. We've tried to think of every aspect of the building to create a high-performing asset into the future. But with every historic building, there's things that happen that we can't predict. And I think probably our biggest one that we're seeing has to do with water flow. This area of town is one of the oldest areas of town, and the water pressure in this town is challenging. But whether that would be our expense to increase the flow, or whether that's the city's expense with Public Works to address the flow capacity, at any given time, the east side of the building can't get enough, or doesn't get enough water pressure to run our sprinkler system at the same time as the other side of the building does. So we're starting to see some of that, and working to figure out solutions to it.
The only other thing I can add is Richard made this building too smart for us. So we're still learning how to operate most of the systems because there's lots of buttons and push things and, doodads and thingamabobs. One really cool feature too is the lighting. I like it the most because I can play with it. I don't know if any of you were at the open house when we were able to tour people through the building, but as you walk down the corridor, it lights up and you feel kind of like special and you're like, woo! ooh, the lights are turning on. So it just keeps it dim when unoccupied. They're all fully LED, and they illuminate when motion comes within a certain range. So that's a really cool feature that I haven't had in any other building. Most of ours are garden walk-up, so this had the interior hallways. Now you want to talk about the smart stuff, don't you?
I mean, it's all per code. I mean, we really don't have any choice these days. The state energy code kind of trumps all those things. So, you know, the DOAS system has a whole bunch of stuff to it. The lighting controls have a bunch of things to it, and it's all energy management. And so you just have to do these things these days and take the credit for it. But, you know, it's all stuff that's mandated. But we did take away some of the buttons. You know, there was control panels in the hallways that we didn't want the residents playing with, so we actually ended up blanking those out. But there are still other features that are still there.
Any other follow-up questions? So grateful you guys joined us on the last day. There's like nobody left here, and you guys are the survivors, and you came to visit us, and we just want to thank you for your engagement and your questions and being here with us today on the last day of the conference. Thank you, panelists. You guys are all awesome. I appreciate everything you do. And with that, I suppose we are finished. Yay.